Hi, everyone. Today we're talking about actuaries as thought leaders. And joining us for this discussion is 2022 Australian Actuary of the Year, Chris Dolman. Chris
Hello.
is. Hi, Chris. Nice to have you again.
Thanks for having me back.
So, a little bit about you before I launch into the questions for today. You're an actuary working at IAG. Your current role of Executive Manager Data and Algorithmic Ethics helps to ensure that modern decision-making algorithms and other advanced uses of data are designed and implemented in an ethical, responsible and thoughtful way. And I'm sure lots of people know you for the work that you've been doing in AI and ethics. And so prior to your current role, you've had a variety of senior management positions, both in the insurance industry and in consulting, both here in Australia and in the UK. And as well, you're an award-winning volunteer, researcher and fellow of the Actuaries Institute and a Gradient Institute fellow. So, Chris, welcome to We Are Actuaries today.
Thanks for having me. It's going to be an interesting chat again, hopefully.
So, congratulations on being the 2022 Actuary of the Year. What's that been like for you?
Thanks. I mean, it was a huge surprise, and obviously a great honour and fantastic to get that sort of recognition. I didn't even know I was nominated. So the
Oh, didn't
first I
you?
no, so the first I heard of it was when I got the call from the president, and we have
Yep.
a family tradition on a Friday night where we like make pizzas and have a movie night and stuff. So I was in the middle of making
Nice.
pizzas with my kids, and my
Yeah.
phone rang, and I answered it. It's a work phone, would do.
Yeah.
Um, and it's the president. And so I said to the kids, I'm talking to the president. I've got to go. Which one of them said, "What, Barack Obama?" Which I thought was superb. He hadn't been president for years, but anyway. So then, yeah, got told that I was going to get that award, which was a big surprise.
Mm.
And I sort of I found the interesting thing I found is I sort of found it a bit hard to accept in my own mind.
Oh,
Like
how so?
I've been a little bit embarrassed by it all, and I've kind of gotten over that a little bit now.
Good.
But especially at the start, it was like there's still so much to do in this space, right? So I've been doing,
Mm.
responsible AI research and what have you for a while, but there's still
Mm.
so much to be done. And
Mhm.
so I was like, well, it's like it's not the end, right? There's still so much more that I want to sort of contribute. So I found that a bit sort of an interesting discovery about myself that maybe I need to go back and you know accept success and things like that a little bit more as I go along. So it took a net sort of reading out a whole list of things I'd done for me to kind of go, yeah, okay, I probably have done quite a lot, and so okay,
Yeah.
I can accept that that's a reasonable award to give me. But I was quite surprised. So
Well, it was
yeah,
very well deserved, and it probably wasn't a surprise to those of us around you. So,
well
um,
that's what everyone said.
mm,
So maybe I need to get a bit better at recognizing things that have been good in the past and not just sort of looking forward all the time, which is what I tend to do. So yeah, that's been interesting. The other thing that's happened is which has been really nice. So a lot of people have just kind of approached me for a bit of a chat about stuff,
okay.
and there's all these people that have kind of followed my work and stuff for a while who I've never
Mm,
met, don't know,
mm,
and people have just kind of gone, "Oh, look, I've really enjoyed these things you've done. Keep doing it, what have you," which at least for me was nice validation that people have been listening and sort of reading
yeah.
things I've written and stuff like that, which you're never sure is sort of happening because you'll hear from some people, but for every person you hear from, it's like complaints in companies, right? Every
Exactly.
one you get, there might be 100 more similar, and
Yeah.
maybe thought leadership is similar. People will read your stuff but not say anything, and the
Yeah.
one person that comes to you is a validation. At least someone's reading it, but there's loads of others
Yeah.
who are silent. So that's been kind of
Absolutely.
interesting as well.
Yeah. Right. So you've met a lot of new people. You've sort
A
of
fair
broadened your
few,
network.
yeah, a
Yeah.
bit, and it's sort of it's been nice, but it's a bit odd for me. Like I don't know that I'm suited to fame, and it feels like I have a little bit, at least in a very small niche sort of circle now, which is extremely odd for me personally. It's never sort of something that I've sought.
Yep.
Um, but it's interesting that it's kind of happened. So
Yep, yep. And I remember you telling me that your daughter was asking about whether you got a trophy for being Actuary of the Year. So is that in her
yes.
eyes? Is that sort of the idea of fame, having a
Well,
trophy?
her first question was whether I got a cash prize.
Oh, cash prize.
She was very interested in the money, which
Yeah.
I didn't, for the record, but I did in the end get a trophy, so that was nice.
Oh, that's good.
So yeah, she's happy that
She's
exists, I
happy.
think. Yeah,
Oh, that's really good. Well, yeah,
yeah,
well, very well deserved, and certainly not a surprise for those around you. But yeah, I think I liked your reflections on, you may be feeling like you hadn't done enough because there is more to do, and I think that's probably reassuring for a lot of actuaries as they come through their career, because when have you done enough? When are you sort of at that point where you know everything? And I think the short answer is you never get there. It's,
never.
it's a career. It's a career. So
That's right.
yeah. So today we're talking about thought leadership. And so I wondered if you could start by telling us how you define thought leadership, Chris.
Yeah, well, there's a few. Think of it in terms of personas, right? Because if you sort of look on social media, you see sort of various thought leader types, but there's quite
Mm.
different types of people. So maybe let's think about the different types of people that you observe.
Hmm.
And well, I've come up with my own little classification ahead of this
Okay, great.
conversation, but
Well, you are the
maybe
thought leader, so
others might have other ideas. But I think there's a character that we might think of as the sort of aggregator or amplifier, right? Who are,
uh-huh.
they'll produce like newsletters, share lots of other people's work, like,
Hmm.
point to things that they like and maybe comment a little bit on it. They're not necessarily producing like huge reports of their own or anything like that, but
Yep.
they're sort of amplifying the work of others.
Yep.
So quite a lot of people seem to be kind of in that ilk, and they get
Mm.
a lot of attention quickly. And I follow
Hmm.
people like this, right? Because they're really helpful. If you want
Yep.
to know what 10 things to read, well, someone will have produced that
They've already
list
done the
for you
work
and
for you. Right.
curated it, right?
Yep.
And it's
Yep.
sort of and podcasts are a little bit like this as well, right? I mean, you're a podcast host now, and
Yep.
so you're inviting people on and trying to curate content in
Right.
a certain area, and so it's kind of like being a news editor in a way. You're sort of
Mm.
creating your own news or newspaper in a way, in a sort of
Yes.
modern form. So there's that sort of character anyway, and there's quite a
Yep.
few of these sorts of people that I follow. Another type, totally separate, is what I think of as sort of storytellers. So they've
Mm.
got a particular thing they're trying to influence, and
Yep.
they do it by just telling either real life or sort of hypothetical stories to try and sort of nudge people in a certain direction. But
Mm.
they're really solidly like pumping stuff out like all the time,
Yep.
really consistently. So there's these aren't as common.
Mm.
Um, but people like I follow Robin Story on LinkedIn, who I don't know
Hmm.
if you know. So she does stuff in like recruitment or what have you. It's brilliant
Yep.
content,
Yep.
just like real life stories, good and bad, about recruitment, to try and
Mm.
help people reflect on what they're doing and improve recruitment practices. But like
Yep.
really engaging stories. So people like that are sort of fun to follow. You get nice little anecdotes that you sort of retell as well, so that's quite
Yep.
good. And it's a way of being, I think, really engaging, but totally different character to the first time.
Yeah.
Um, and then the last is sort of probably more what I've been doing, which is more sort of deep dive technical commentary and sort of innovation on that front.
Yep.
So more sort of longer form content with surrounding promotion when you've got something to say. So you're
Mm.
not
Mm.
necessarily saying something every day, but you're saying things occasionally and doing it in quite a few different formats.
Yep.
And I say sort of technical content, and to actuaries, that often means maths. And I don't mean maths necessarily. It could be
Mm.
policy work, it could be sort of commentary or sort of critique on what's going on, certain types of white paper, even sort of strategy type stuff. That's exactly this sort of type of thought leadership. Um, and so, yeah, there's probably two subtypes here. There's the sort of blogger op-ed type,
Yep.
who might be sort of saying things a bit more often in sort of shorter form. And then there's the more sort of academic sort, where it's like a 50-page report on something with promotion. And often people sort of traverse both of those. So I've sort of done both of those in my time.
Yep.
Um, the main thing with this type is you're trying to have some influence in an area, but you're not sort of every day pushing content out and doing it like that. It's sort of from
Yep.
time to time. So I think a lot of actuaries can be that type quite easily
Mm.
without that much day-to-day effort, if you like, in terms of the promotion side. But they could obviously do the others as well. I mean, so that's my three characters. There might be others, right? But
I really like that.
Yeah.
No, I really like that, Chris. And I've never thought about thought leadership in that way of having sort of different personas. But as I've listened to you describe it, it makes total sense. I remember
Well, I'm
back
glad
in
it makes sense to you. It made sense in my own head. So, you know, I've now got one point of validation.
Well, you know, I'm sure our listeners will also validate that for you. But yeah, certainly that makes sense. And I remember back in, you know, when I was sort of Big Four consulting, thought leadership was just about writing papers. And, you know, for many actuaries, that can feel quite daunting. You know, the idea of doing that deep dive type, you know, report writing and everything's under scrutiny and everything's got to be kind of referenced and stuff, that can feel quite intimidating. And so I think that can put a lot of actuaries off, you know, thought leadership. But, you know, the way you've described it as well, the storyteller and the amplifier, you know, they're also some, and, you know, we don't all have to just be one of those personas.
No, you could be all
but
three. But,
you know, thinking about it from a different perspective, I think, some of those ways, you know, different but equally effective ways of being thought leaders as well.
That's right. And none of those are more important than the other. They're all sort of essential in the environment and the way it works. And if you're a deep dive thought leader, you want amplifiers amplifying your content. That's useful, right?
It's part of the ecosystem.
You don't want to be like, oh, these amplifiers, they're not doing anything on their own. No, they're essential. They're the ones that are going to help your work be better known, you know?
Yeah. Oh, well, that makes me feel better that we're all part of the ecosystem.
That's right. It's all essential and useful work, right? So
No, okay. So that's how you define thought leadership. And your sort of different personas. I really like that. Why would someone want to be a thought leader?
This is a really interesting question, and I think a few people have had sort of conversations with me over the last year or so, and people have sort of come to me and said, look, I want to be a thought leader, right? But I sort of don't know where to start. And having had a few of those sorts of conversations and not really knowing how to approach them, I've come to the conclusion that you've got to sort of start answering that by sort of attacking the mindset that question comes from. And so if people say, I want to be a thought leader, it's a bit like when your kids sort of say, if they do, mine haven't, thankfully, but I know people's do, sort of say, I want to be famous, right? And as a parent, you sort of know if you hear that, the appropriate response is along the lines of like, well, that's great, Johnny, but what do you want to be famous for? You know?
Yep.
So you've got to really focus on like the outcome or the thing you want to do, not just the like being famous part, right? That's not really going to motivate you for long, and it's not really the appropriate sort of motivation in any way. The follow-up question I get then on that is sort of along the lines of, again, it's the wrong sort of question. It's like, how do I get involved with things? And again, that's to me is kind of the wrong mindset. This is like, I want to be famous by tagging along with another famous person and sort of riding on the coattails. And that's not really, again, how you want to be approaching this. So I think you need to be working out what your own motives are. And it's got to be more than just, I want to be a thought leader. There needs to be some influence you want to have on the world, right? And some reason why you want to do that. So it's important for you to sort of sit back and reflect on that a bit and work out, what do you actually want to do and why? And then go and do it. You don't need other people to help you. You can just go and do it. So yeah, that's kind of how I've been approaching those conversations, which I think has maybe helped some people. I don't know.
So so what you're saying is you don't want to be a thought. You don't say I want to be a thought leader just to be a thought leader. Like you don't want to be famous just to be famous.
That's right.
But but you want to be a thought leader so that you can achieve some other goal. Like it's kind of like an enabler to achieve some other goal around, you know, propelling your career in a certain direction that you're interested in, or, you know, helping you to get some information out to the world that, you know, you think is missing, or, you know, there's some sort of purpose.
That's right.
That so the thought leadership helps you with.
You know, you might be wanting to raise awareness of an issue or enact some change or convince people in general about something, or like you might want to lobby government for something. All of these things you might want to do. And a mechanism by which you do that is doing thought leadership work, so putting stuff out into the world and trying to enact change. But you're not doing it for the hell of it. You're doing it with an underlying purpose.
Purpose. Yeah. And your purpose being?
Well, so I've sort of thought about my own motives with this, right? My own motives, well, it varies depending on the stuff I do, and I've done a bunch of different things as we've sort of discussed before. But my motives are often quite negative in sort of some sense.
Okay.
So I'm usually coming from a place of being sort of a bit frustrated or annoyed about something, or a sort of something needs to happen, which you just hope someone's going to do, and it doesn't sort of happen. So I often sort of found myself in that place. And I did a little deal with myself a couple of years ago, and I said, if I'm in that sort of place, don't whinge, get up and do something about it. Or option number two is find the person to do something about it and convince them to do what needs to happen, because you can't do everything. Or option
to take
three,
some sort of action.
That's right. Or option three, just ignore it and get on with life, because just don't sit there whinging. Now, I'm sure I don't always achieve this. I'm guarantee I still whinge about stuff all the time. But hopefully I do it a bit less. And it just, that mindset change just forces you to be a bit more proactive, right? So you're forcing yourself to say, okay, what can I do about this thing that I can see? Because I think sometimes as actuaries, we sort of we know a lot, right? We understand a lot of particular things about the world, but I think we think that that knowledge is more common than it is. So maybe the things that you see are not commonly known, and so maybe you're the one that actually needs to take them on and sort them out. So people need to maybe have that attitude a little bit more, that maybe what they think is obvious isn't quite so obvious.
It's not always obvious to everyone around us, and not always obvious to the people who aren't doing the kind of work that we're doing. So
that's right. That's right. So yeah, then once you've sort of once you've got your motives sorted out, right, you know what you want to do, you know sort of what influence you want to have, then you've got to, I think, get a bit more practical. So like, what does success actually look like? You sort of know what your motives are, but how are you going to actually understand whether you're achieving what you want? Are people going to have read your work? Are they going to change what they do in some way? Is policy going to change if you're sort of engaging with government or what have you? Because depending on what your audience is, you might want to present things in different ways. Right. So
can you give me an example?
Well, so I've done a few like submissions to government on policy sort of reviews and things that are going on. Like, you're writing that in a very different way to how you'd write like a research paper or what have you, which is going to have a much broader audience. Like, the policy things are often a lot more targeted. There might be specific questions you're sort of addressing, and so you're a bit more punchy. If you're giving a talk, right, you're not writing as much in detail. You've got some slides, you want to make it visual and engaging and what have you. So there's all these different formats that you need to sort of think about. So you might have different audiences at different times. So you've got to adapt your content to those audiences as much as you can. And I don't think I'm the best at this, by the way, but I sort of, at least I'm aware of it and have a go. The other thing to do is like find collaborators. So it's much more fun to do things with other people rather than on your own.
That's
and
true.
A lot of actuaries are not great at collaborating with non-actuaries, though. So we're getting better, I think, as a profession, but we're often still a little bit insular. And I've found the sort of multidisciplinary work to be like exceptionally good, both for like the quality of the content that you can get at the end, because people will bring their own expertise to the table and you get something that's better. But also just you learn a lot from people who know different things to you.
For sure.
So,
why do you think we're bad at that, Chris? Why do you think actuaries typically find that challenging?
I don't know, but it's just something that I observe. Like, a lot of, not everyone, there are quite a lot of people who do interdisciplinary work, but quite often you go to these conferences and it's, a paper written by 5 actuaries. And I just think, wouldn't it be great if it was 2 actuaries and, 3 other different people? That might be bring different perspectives to things, and it would be a bit better as a result. So
more diversity of thought.
Yeah. So things I'm doing at the moment, I try and well, sometimes I have other actuaries, but I try and at least have other people as well, so you can
Mm,
bring sort of
mm,
diversity into it, and that's been very good. Um, what else do you need to do when you're doing thought leadership? I think you need to um, acknowledge that it's going to take a bit of time.
mhm.
So sometimes people think it's like one of those little side projects that just kind of happens when it happens, and like we all know how they work out, right? You've got to
Yep.
actually dedicate a proper amount of time
Mm,
to what you're doing. Doesn't have to be, days and days and days. You can get quite a lot done in short chunks, but it can't be zero, right? It can't just be,
mm.
oh, it happens when it happens, because you'll go and have a break and make a coffee and get distracted, because that's just what people are like.
That's true.
Um, so
How,
you
so,
need to.
how do you make time for thought leadership, Chris? I mean, you got a busy role, you've got a family. How do you make time for it?
Well, I'm fortunate that part of my role includes time for research, so I'm sort of
Okay.
allowed to, in my day job, spend a little bit of time doing stuff.
Mm, mm,
But also just you block out chunks of time in your
mm,
diary, same as you
mm,
do for anything at work, right?
mm.
If you're gonna write a report, you're best off blocking out a chunk of time in your diary and getting it
Yep.
done.
Yep.
Well, research is no different. If
It's the
that's what you're
same.
going to do, block the time out, make sure you dedicate the time. It's like any meeting, you don't move it unless you really, really, really have to,
Yep.
and then make it happen. Otherwise, the diary fills up, right, and things
It
just don't
does.
occur. Um, the other thing I try and do is I try and have multiple things on the go at once, which people just find terrifying, because then just
Mm.
there's too much happening, surely. But not everything's going to be in a critical phase all at the same time. So you can
Uh-huh.
kind of balance things a little bit. Um, and
Can you give
often
us an example of how you might have sort of more than one thing on the go?
I always have at least half a dozen things on the go, but
Oh, wow.
I go from sort of vague thought bubbles to like actual written stuff, and there's sort of
Uh-huh.
like a continuum, right? So, and vague thought bubbles often don't amount to much. So,
Mm.
one of the one of the ways because my motives, as I said, was kind of irritation sometimes,
Mm.
and one of my ways of processing that is just to write stuff.
Mm.
And sometimes that'll turn into a paper. Sometimes that just turns into a cathartic rant that I gave to myself that I can then
Yep.
delete, and that's fine.
Yep.
Um,
Still served
so
its purpose.
that's right. It served its purpose, and
Yeah.
so you just need to work out what you want to publish, what you don't want to publish, what
Yep.
state it's in, and also how long you want it to sort of go on for before you decide
Mm.
does it need to die or not.
Yeah.
Um, I've had some papers that sit on the back burner for years and then they resurrect themselves when the right opportunity comes about.
Mhm.
So you might need the right co-author, for example, to bring something
Right.
else to the table. So there was a paper I did for, I think it was a year or two ago, the Actuary Summit, and that had been in percolation for about 6 years, I think.
Mm, wow.
But I hadn't touched it for about four. And then I
Mm.
had a random conversation with someone I know, and it just sort of happened.
Came back to
So
life.
that's right. So these
Mm.
things sometimes can just percolate for a while, and that's totally fine.
Mm. Interesting.
So it's not like you've not got a publishing deal with a book publishing house where you've got to crunch out content on a certain schedule or anything like that. You're
Yeah.
doing this because you want to have influence, and
Yeah.
you need to do it at the right time.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, recycling is important. This was a revelation
Recycling.
to me. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Tell us about that.
um, you've got to you've got some content, right? You don't present it once. You present
Mm.
it 20 times in different
Mm.
forums to different
Mm.
people with different slides, because you've got to emphasize different things to different groups. And
Mm.
um, often people can look like they're a lot busier than they actually are in this space because they're
Mhm.
recycling content. Um,
Ah.
I've seen some people, particularly that those sort of first two personas I talked about on LinkedIn, they just
Yep.
recycle content all the time,
Mm.
because you post something twice, different people see it both times.
Yep.
And this, I hadn't really thought about this until a couple of years ago, but it's quite a revelation when you try and do it, because you realize you can get a lot more impact for a single piece of work by just
Yep.
presenting it in different places.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
Seems
So
obvious, but until you think about it, you just sort of you think I've written my report, I've done my presentation, done. Next thing,
yeah,
no, you can recycle
you
things.
can recycle it. And it sounds like recycling isn't necessarily just reusing, representing, but maybe thinking about your different audience and, like you said, emphasizing different slides or presenting it in a different format or,
That's right.
to
That's
sort of
right.
increase your reach.
That's right. And sometimes things get they sort of evolve over time, right? So
Mm,
um, I did a I did a few presentations on sort of risk management of AI systems probably 3 or 4 years ago, and the
hmm.
content of those sort of evolved over time to different groups over a couple of years.
Yep.
Then that turned into a paper at the Actuaries Summit a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
Then that turned into a chapter of a book
Right.
which I got invited to contribute. So these things sort of evolve over time, but
Yeah.
you're basically recycling the same ideas in different places.
Yep.
And that way your idea can have more influence because different
Mm,
people are going to see it at different times.
mm. Okay.
So yeah.
So, okay, so you've shared a couple of ideas about good ways to become known as a thought, or good ways to do thought leadership. But is there anything else that you wanted to share around good ways to become known as a thought leader?
Um, probably the only thing I've not mentioned is just like making use of your associations. So,
Oh yeah.
I'm an actuary, you're an actuary, we're members of the
Hmm.
Institute. The Institute's got a voice, and you can use that voice sometimes
Mm.
rather than your own voice for certain issues. So the
Yep.
Institute does policy submissions on various things. Some of those I've written, some of those, well, like actuaries write them, right? The volunteers
Yep.
write them, including
Yep.
myself. Um, and sometimes that means you can have more influence than if you wrote it yourself. So same with we I work for a big company. You've worked for companies before that do
Hmm.
policy submissions. They're written by staff. Um, those staff can push opinions that they have using that voice rather than their own, and that might be more effective on certain matters.
Mm.
So it doesn't always need to be stuff in your own name.
Right.
Sometimes it can be stuff in someone else's name if that's a louder or more powerful voice.
Mm.
That
Mm.
might be effective because if your motives are to enact change,
Yep.
not to be famous,
Yep.
then you don't need to be personally, your name on everything. It can just be
Yep.
the change is happening and you're happy to have played your part.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
so the thought
yeah,
leadership doesn't need to just be all in your name. You can collaborate with others. You can
that's right.
use work or the institute or your professional body to kind of elevate the messaging that you're wanting to get out there. You don't have to do it all on your own.
That's right. That's right.
Mm. Mm. Very interesting. So I want to ask you a bit about career planning. Was there anything else that you wanted to share on thought leadership before we move on?
Uh, I'll talk about something I found tricky, maybe. So
Yeah.
I'm a fairly shy, sort of fairly private person a lot of the time, which some people find surprising because I think I've gotten better at this over time. But I get quite, I certainly had to deal with a bit of fear, and two types of fear sort of really affected me, and people get affected in different ways, right?
Mm.
But certainly for me, the first type is your sort of natural fear of saying something silly, which a lot of people have, and it sort of holds people back from doing this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and you work out ways of managing that yourself over time. But for me, having a bunch of people around that can objectively review or give you feedback on some of your work, like no holds barred. Chris, you're being an idiot. Don't say that. That's right. Like you just need a group of people you trust that can do that. And
Yep.
they're not going to be like, oh gosh, I couldn't say that. You need someone to be honest with you. So
Yep.
having a bunch of people like that is helpful. For presenting, just practicing, I find is useful.
Mm.
So if I'm doing a presentation, I'll practice it a bunch of times, and then it's obvious basic stuff, but you just have
Yep.
to do it. And I find that helps you sort of um, manage your own nervousness about what you're going to say because you already
Yeah.
said it 5 times.
Yeah.
I don't find I can use scripts. I'm not one of those people that can write down exactly what they're going to say and say it. I sort of have to
Mm.
ad lib a bit.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, that practice is essential. But
Yep.
just being kind to yourself. You're going to fail sometimes. You're going to say something silly. You're going to have to backtrack. That's fine.
Yep.
We're not. you're not a politician. You're not having to defend U-turns and things like that. You're allowed to change your mind. That's totally fine. You're allowed to say, I didn't quite mean that. I meant this other thing instead. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
The other type of fear is just I used to I used to think it was fear of public speaking, but it's actually not, and it's been quite interesting to sort of tease out what this is about myself. So I find certain types of presentations super easy. Like this for me is pretty easy.
Yeah.
Even though it's going to be pasted on the internet, lots of people watching it, hopefully, and that's totally fine, no
Yeah.
problem. But standing up in front of a room of 20 people I don't know is very hard.
Right.
So for me, it's all about the sort of environment. So certain environments I find more intimidating than others.
Okay.
So it's not just presenting. I've presented online to 2,000 people, and you can see lots of little boxes with heads, and that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But rooms with people, quite intimidating, even
Yeah.
small rooms.
Yeah.
So the way I manage that is kind of practicing, but environmental practicing. So
Okay.
I had to get on stage at the Congress of Actuaries, which was very intimidating for me. I sort of saw that we were billed on that stage and went, holy hell, what am I going to do? So get on stage beforehand in the break, stand at the
Yeah.
lectern,
Right.
work it like just practice in the
Yeah.
environment, and then it's not so bad. It's still
Yeah.
still scary, but you can get through it.
Yeah,
So
some great
yeah.
tips there. And great to hear, well, sorry to hear, but also kind of great to hear that, you do have that fear as well, because sometimes it's easy to look at the people who are up there on the stage and go, oh, they look like they know what they're doing. I could never do that. But really, quite often they're
Oh
managing their
yeah,
own fear and
yeah,
they've
that's
taken the
right.
steps to kind of manage that as well. So
Yeah.
some
People
preparation's
have told
important.
me that they can't tell, which is
No.
which is nice to know, but
Yeah.
it's like it's not true.
Yeah, well, I saw your presentation at the Congress. I thought it was fabulous, and you look very comfortable, and you looked like you totally knew what you were talking about. You didn't look worried at all. So,
Yeah. It's actually the environment in the end wasn't quite so bad because the lights were so bright I couldn't actually see the people in front of me. So that kind of helped in a way.
very good. All right, so I did want to ask you about career planning, but I probably just want to ask maybe your sort of top tip or view on that
Yeah.
before I ask my final question for the interview.
No worries. Well, planning, I'm not a big planner.
Okay.
I, I'm in a job now that didn't exist 10 years ago. It might
Mm.
not exist in 10 years' time. And
Mhm.
so just don't worry too much about the long-term
Mm.
plan. Do the
Mm.
things that motivate you and interest you now, and be open to ideas and create opportunities for yourself, right? You don't have to wait passively for things to come along. You can create opportunities for yourself. So just do that in the moment incrementally and
Mhm.
see where you go. You don't have to have a 10-year plan.
That's great advice. Very good advice. And that's paid off very well for you because you're Actuary of the Year 2022
Yeah.
and famous as an actuary, if we can use that word.
Well, apparently I did earlier in this. So yeah, there you go.
Okay, Chris. So my final question for the interview is this. What is your top tip for actuaries who are aspiring to become thought leaders or maybe even Actuary of the Year?
Um, so my main advice is just to get started. Actually do something. A lot of people don't even start because they're worried or scared or don't quite know what to do. And it's okay. We all have those problems, but just do something anyway. Just get started, and actually lead it. Don't tag along. Don't wait for someone else to start something so you can join in. Do the thing that you want to do, and it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't even need to actually publish the thing that you start doing because you're just doing it and you only know about it and no one else knows about it. If you decide it's rubbish, you can delete it and that's fine. But if you don't start, then you'll never know if it's going to be rubbish or if it's going to be good. And in the end, you'll create something good and you'll publish it and put it out into the world and off you go. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. The first time you write a paper, it's scary and it takes forever and you're not quite happy with it, but it was good enough and you put it out there and it's okay. The second time, it's so much easier. The third time, it's easier again. And by the time you've written 10 things, it's like, oh, yeah. So, yeah, just get started. and see what happens.
Get started and see what happens. Great advice. Thank you, Chris. I'm sure that will be very encouraging and inspiring for all of the actuaries listening today. Chris Dolman, thank you for your time on We Are Actuaries today.
No worries. Thanks for having me. It's been great.